All right, let's get into Daryl Dixon episode 3. I have somebody mowing lawns outside my window, so hopefully that's not too distracting. What I will say about this episode, I really enjoyed watching it. I don't think there's quite as much to talk about as there was in episode 2. Not that there isn't anything. There's a lot of callbacks in this episode, but it just felt like in episode 2, every single thing screamed Beth, and this is just a little bit less. So we start with them getting to Angers, which is a little town, and they find this sort of crazy musician. And honestly, this first part stumped me a little bit. I mean, just in terms of, I had a hard time wrapping my head around what it was trying to symbolize for us. I had to kind of hash it out with my my fellow theorists. So they go to see this man. He does speak some English, and the reason they went there is Isabel thinks he has a radio. And there's a lot of musical references in this episode for sure, which, you know, makes me happy. But he speaks some English to them and then takes them back to where there is a radio, but he's taken it apart. He's sort of harvested the parts out of it in order to help amplify the music that he plays, which is what he tells them. And then it turns out that he's conducting an orchestra full of walkers. So he's a little crazy, it's true. But then Daryl gets really kind of upset and says this was a stupid detour. So I was trying to figure it out. I was just going, there's so many different Beth symbols here, but I'm having a hard time really wrapping my head around what they're trying to tell us here. But a few of the details I noticed. First of all, there is a record, and we saw records around Beth at Grady, And I also noticed when he speaks English to them, okay, first of all, this guy made me laugh. I kept laughing at him. I thought he was funny. He says, oh, I speak English. He says, sky is blue, grass is green. And then he says this random line that he obviously heard somewhere that says, where is Brian? He is in the kitchen. And then he goes, voila. That's to show that he's really good at English. I mean, he was clearly very pleased with himself. Anyway, he just made me laugh. I thought he was really funny. In terms of what he said, I mean, grass is green kind of caught my ear. The name Brian is interesting. The governor took the name Brian Harriet when he left and met Tara and her sister, whose name was also Lily, same as Isabel's sister. And the governor was one who also left and was presumed dead and then returned. So just kind of interesting. I was trying to figure out what they were trying to tell us, given the fact that parts were taken from the radio, and we've always wondered if a radio will be involved in how we see Beth again. It's also part of the communication theme. But parts were taken from that in order to amplify music. And I don't know. I'm not sure I'm entirely wrapping my head around what they're trying to tell us here. But after talking to my fellow theorists, W.D. Way suggested that it just means that there will be detours along the way, but Beth is the ultimate destination. I really, really like that. The other thing is that when this man goes in and starts conducting, he's shouting above the music, and he's shouting things like the music, and he says other things too, like art and culture, but obviously the music is what caught my ear. And he says the music, it still lives, which is totally code for Beth is alive. She's the songbird, she's the music. So I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, and it's just another way of saying Beth is coming. He's on his way to her. He's going to figure out she's alive soon. It also could foreshadow something, and I just don't know what it is yet because it hasn't happened. And so maybe at some point I'll, have kind of an epiphany moment and be like, oh, that's what that was about. And if I do, I'll let you guys know for sure. Anyway, but like I said, I thought he was kind of funny. And then the other thing about that is that it did not move the story forward at all. Like, it was literally, they could have taken that out and it wouldn't have changed anything. They went somewhere, it didn't pan out, they left. That was it. So it seemed like it was extra and not something they absolutely had to put in. But usually when that happens on TWD, it's because they are either foreshadowing something or paralleling something or calling back to something. Anyway, so that's when Daryl says they are going to Paris, and they do. Right before they leave, we get some interesting things going on. He tells, I actually thought it was kind of funny that he gives the gun to Sylvie and tells her to guard the horse, because after what happened to, Asterix, the mule, the horse is actually a commodity. And so he's saying, don't let anything happen to the horse. We need the horse, but it also just kind of calls back to Buttons. And then a walker does actually come out toward the wagon. It's, two of them, although only one of them is animated. The man is walking, and he's joined at the wrist to a woman that is a corpse. It's not an animated walker. At first I thought it would be handcuffs. That's what it looked like. And we've definitely seen the handcuff symbol a lot. But this was, it was basically the same function as a handcuff, but it was actually a chain that was wrapped around both of them. I think that was a foreshadow of the experiments we see later in the episode. But beyond that, it was just interesting. You had a man chained to a woman who was dead. She was literally dead weight, and he was dragging her along. Again, in a way, it goes back to the governor, because one of the governor's episodes in 4B was called Dead Weight. Anyway, like I said, there were some interesting things going on, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of it yet. But if I come up with anything, I'll let you know. Anyway, the more obvious callback to Beth was that Sylvie didn't actually shoot the walker. She was getting ready to, but she was hesitating. And Daryl went and took the gun from her and shot it. And it just reminded me of, Beth trying to kill the walker after she hurt her ankle. And then Daryl did it for her. So kind of a callback there. When they get to Paris, he says, "Welcome home," which was kind of interesting. And then they start walking through a very famous cemetery in Paris. Interestingly, Laurent tells him the story of a fable. I will probably butcher it if I try to say what it is, but it's about a weary woodsman who decides he wants to give up and die. But then when death comes for him, he changes his mind. And Laurent says that he asks for help in carrying his burden, and it's about fortitude. Now, clearly, this is meant to be about Daryl. They're definitely applying this to Daryl. So I think it's a bit of a foreshadow, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Daryl also notices Jim Morrison's grave. I actually did not know he was buried in Paris. I looked that up, but he really is. There was another record in front of his grave, and there were red roses, and I wasn't sure if that was because people are continuing to bring fresh flowers to his grave, or if maybe they weren't real and they were plastic, but they looked, even plastic flowers, in the apocalypse, you'd think they would have rotted away by now. Anyway, so that was kind of interesting, and it's just another musical reference. Like all through this, we see records, we hear music, we see dancing, we see art. It's just a very artsy themed episode, which of course always reminds us of Beth. So then they meet Falou, who shows them, his place that he's built with all these people. And when he gets there, he says "home sweet home," which is a callback to one of the bonus episodes in season 10. But even that was a callback to Daryl saying it at the Moonshine Shack. He said "home sweet home." And remember that home is when you're with the people that you love and you're supposed to be with. It's kind of just wherever your family is. So it was important that Daryl said that when he was with Beth. And it was interesting to hear it here. There was another really sad moment when it comes to Daryl being lonely when Falou says, "We all have a person who waits for us somewhere," and Daryl's head just goes down. Dagger to the heart. That was so sad. We have the children giving Laurent things, and so it seems that a lot of these children know who Isabel and Falou think Laurent is, that he's some sort of messiah, and that's why they were gifting him things. So they seem to know that, and he kind of doesn't, which is, it is a little bit weird. It's getting weird, which is why Daryl gets after Isabel for it and says, "You really need to tell him what's going on here." So there's a lot of religious aspects to this. Isabel says God chooses our burdens, and we see Laurent go up and comfort the widow, which is a very Christ figure thing to do. We also see the homing pigeons here, which honestly, I laughed a lot during this episode. Daryl was really surly about things, and I was chuckling all through it. He was not happy about the homing pigeons at all. But it'll be interesting to see where they go with it. We saw some leaked footage where they come out of a suitcase. And I don't know, there's a lot of people who see them as similar to doves, which is definitely a biblical symbol. So I don't know, we'll have to wait and see kind of what they do with these pigeons, but they're kind of fun. We also, one other thing I picked up is that they're looking at the Eiffel Tower and they're still a ways away from it. They can just see it in the distance. And Daryl mentions that the tip of it seems to be gone. And Falou says that a military helicopter crashed into the tip right after the turn happened. That sounds a lot like the CRM. We don't know if the CRM are in France, but we do know that in the first season, Dr. Jenner was talking about the French and that they seem to have been holding out the longest when it came to trying to figure out the virus. So it was just kind of interesting to hear that a military helicopter crashed into the Eiffel Tower. I feel like that's a hint towards something that we're going to find out later on. So then we see Cordon again and Jeanette. He plays Daryl's tape for her. The place she stays is apparently called Maison Mère, which just means mother's house. So she's kind of the mother to everyone. I wanted to throw in too that I actually recorded answers to a whole bunch of asks yesterday, so I'll be posting those all week. And some of the things I said, now that we've seen this episode, are going to feel a little bit superfluous. For example, at one point I said that Quinn would probably return at some point, but now that this was the episode he returned, so that's not going to be news to anybody. Anyway, I know that I have one I answered about Jeanette and how she is very like Dawn. She feels like, she kind of looks like her. She's running an organization that feels a little bit Grady-ish, and all of that's true. But after watching this episode, I will say that she seems way scarier and way more dangerous than Dawn. Dawn always had this kind of air of, she doesn't really know what the hell's going on, and Jeanette does not seem that way at all. She seems like someone you do not screw with. And anyway, she just seems much scarier to me, much more formidable as a villain than Dawn ever was. So we see these experiments that they're doing, and I don't know what to make of these yet, but they're definitely twisted. There's a walker, I don't know what they do to him, but he starts freaking out. He pulls his chains out of the wall, which means he kind of becomes superhuman, but his eyes are black in a way that we don't usually see on the walkers. And then he runs into the glass, and it looks like his brain is exploding, like it's coming out of his eyes and nose. I mean, it's gross. And the guy says, I don't remember, was it 18 seconds? I'll have to go back and look at that. If it is, there's another 18. But I don't know what it is that they're testing, but it was like, ew, okay, so these people are twisted. So yeah, that was super interesting. So Daryl and Isabel go to visit her home, and my fellow theorist and I were talking about this. He finds a picture of her and Quinn, and he mentions she was using it as a bookmark in something she was reading, and he mentions that she was on page 23. Now, that's one of those extremely random numbers that they throw in, but there's nothing random about it when they throw it in. To anyone else who isn't paying attention to the symbolism, it would be like, well, what difference does it make what page she's on? She doesn't take the book. She's not going to read it. Why did we need to know that? Well, 22 is a number that we see a lot, and W.D. Way has done a lot of research, so has Frank and Pan and Love, about the number 22. And I'm not going to go into all of that right now, but it could be that 23 is just close to 22. It's something that's supposed to remind us of it. But I did remember another time when we saw the number 23 in a big way. It was clear back in season 511, which is where Rick and the whole group first go to Alexandria with Aaron. He wants to take them on Route 16. That's one of the highways, because that highway has been cleared of walkers. And Rick doesn't want to do that because he's not sure he trusts Aaron yet. And he wants to approach Alexandria from a direction they won't be looking for. So he wants to take Route 23. And Aaron tells him that's a really bad idea because that route has not been cleared of walkers. But Rick's going to do it anyway. So they go in two separate cars, and of course, disaster strikes. They run into walkers, quite literally. They lose the cars. They have to run into the woods. It's dark. Nobody knows where anybody else is. They all get separated. Eventually, we follow Rick's group, like we're not with Daryl the whole time. And he eventually comes out on Highway 16, which is the route they were originally supposed to take. And then they take that toward, I think that's where they see the flare by the water tower, and they take that to where the rest of the group is, and everybody reunites and everybody's okay. So I think the symbolism there is that Route 23 is like the bad route. It's the unhealthy route. It's the route where everything goes wrong, where they run into walkers, where everybody gets separated. Route 16 is the good route that they take home, as it were, not necessarily to a place, but to where their family is, and reunite with everybody. So this could just be the show's way of saying that Isabel was on a really destructive route when she was with Quinn, and it just wasn't anything good. And we don't really know why that would have been entirely at this point in the show. I mean, obviously, he was kind of a douche because he wanted to leave her sister behind when she was pregnant. And so nobody really liked him anyway from what we saw of him in the backstory. But then later this episode, we learn why that was way more destructive a route and way more destructive a relationship than even Isabel realized at the time, right? So it was a hint that something was a lot more wrong there than she realized. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting that they threw in the number 23 there. So then we get this part where Daryl and Isabel talk. And I do think this was a major callback to Consumed. It reminded me of him and Carol staring out the window at Grady and talking. Isabel talks about a bar that was down the street, so that's an alcohol reference, and about how when the bartender pulled the drapes, only the regulars were allowed to stay, and most of them were artists and singers who would dream about making the world better, reinventing the world, and they just had no idea how bad it was about to be. So there were a lot of callbacks to Beth, but the two of them standing here talking and getting to know each other a little bit better just reminded me of Carol and Daryl talking, looking out the window while they were while they were looking for Beth. She does get her stuff out of the box to trade, and it includes not only the money that she used to steal, but drugs, and I think Daryl was a little surprised by that, but as with everything, he kind of takes it in stride. They can't get out because there's walkers in the stairwell, so they take the service entrance out back, and this is where we find Amy, little girl walker from the trailer that we also saw in Isabel's backstory. And it was just terribly sad. The whole Amy thing, I mean, she's wearing the same outfit she was the day that Isabel saw her, which means she died that same day, which is really, really sad. And obviously it was quite disturbing for Isabel. I did notice that they focused in on the fact that Amy's legs were immobile. She was caught in, I don't know what it was, maybe a briar patch, and she couldn't really move. Her legs were caught. And I felt like they focused on that a lot. So maybe a callback to Beth getting her foot caught in the trap, and just to being trapped in general. We see that a lot. People who are trapped or can't get out of somewhere, it's the same kind of thing as when we see the handcuff a lot. Just getting stuck in a really bad situation. So Walker Amy knocks over some pots, and then the noise starts making walkers jump out the window and hit the ground, which is pretty gross. And Daryl uses a burner walker. He presses it into the roots to burn through them so they can get out the gate, which was kind of genius, She did find a picture of her sister, which she's able to give to Laurent, which I thought was cute. And then they go meet some people that Falou knows, looking for someone who can put Daryl on a ship back to America. This is where they go into the nightclub. It definitely has kind of a speakeasy vibe to it. You have the singers. They go through the catacombs. Like I said, a lot of this is just stuff that's happening in the plot. We're not getting quite as much symbolism here as we did in the last episode. But we do have more singers in this place. We have alcohol. We have the paintings that Daryl and Isabel look at, which were interesting. So the first thing that I was reminded of was Beth and Edwards talking about the Caravaggio painting in Slabtown. And especially because Isabel talks about how they saved this painting, and Edwards talked about how he saved the Caravaggio. He found it on the street, near a garbage can. And there's, Daryl isn't all that impressed with it because he never is, but Isabel likes it. And it kind of just feels similar to, the conversation that Beth and Edwards had about whether you can have art in the world and have transcendence or whether it's only about survival. But then W.D. Way actually pointed out that there's also a heavy parallel there to Consumed and the painting they saw that Carol liked and Daryl didn't. He said it looked like a dog had wiped its ass in paint and then wiped it on the canvas, so it is similar to that as well. So we're getting a lot of callbacks here. She also found something pretty cool. As they're looking at it, there's something that says C29 on the wall behind them. It's just graffiti, but W.D. Way is big on numbers. That's why she always pays attention to the license plates and such. Way better than I am at it. And episode 29 is called Home. It's actually, I've talked about it before. It's my favorite episode of season 3, where Daryl leaves with Merle and then ends up coming back to the home where he's actually supposed to be, where his family is. Incidentally, Beth is there as well. But the important thing is that Daryl looks at the water lilies painting and says it reminds him of home. And behind them is a 29, and episode 29 was called Home. Also, the C, at the time that the episode Home happened, it was in season 3, the family was living in cell block C. And when Beth talks to Carol about Daryl leaving, you can see cell block C written in big letters above them. So it's kind of fun when we see that the writers put these things in as callbacks, but you really have to pay close attention to them. I probably wouldn't have picked that up, but WDA is really good at picking stuff like that up. So that one's really fun. She also noticed the painting next to it. I meant to zero in on it, and I never got around to it, but it's definitely a different style than the water lilies painting. And the thing that she noticed is that you can see two women, both of them, their dresses, the backs of them are cut in V's. And whenever we see V's, we think of the Mary Magdalene theories, like a chalice or the Da Vinci Code sort of thing. And that's definitely a symbolism that the show uses as well. So we have both of them with V-cut dresses, and then one of them is black and one of them is white. So yeah, definitely more symbolism going on. These are picked really specifically to mean particular things. Well, as they, things progress in the nightclub, they try to talk to Galou's contacts about getting a boat for Daryl, but he starts to get suspicious that something weird is going on, and it breaks out into a fight. And then Quinn shows up. So, as I said, he comes back into it, and he's Isabel's ex, and you can tell she's a little bit thrown by having him there, but she kind of tries to take it in stride. We do hear the word lucky several times in the episode. Now, I've talked about the luck theme since Grady because Beth said it to Edwards. When he said that he was bored, she said, "You're lucky if you feel safe enough to be bored." And I've always seen the way that they use luck or lucky in Walking Dead is to say that somebody survived, but maybe that they shouldn't have. Like, they're not strong enough to survive on their own. They're not strong enough to protect themselves or defend themselves, but they were lucky enough to find somebody else who did. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily a bad thing, like an evil person who shouldn't have survived, but just that they probably couldn't have survived on their own, so they were lucky, that sort of thing. So Isabel tells Daryl that he got lucky because, as it turns out, she does know people in Paris, and she thinks that Quinn will be able to help Daryl, which he did say that he would. He then takes them into his office, and he mentions that it's a World War II bunker. So we have more references to wars, especially World War II. I thought that was interesting. And Quinn basically admits, he says pragmatism he can respect. So he admits that he's going to switch sides on people depending on which one suits his agenda better. So, hey, I mean, I guess at least he admits it. But then we find out some pretty disturbing things about him. We find out that he was the father of Lily's child. That's why she never wanted to tell Isabel who the father was. And, Lily was an adult, but she also did seem very innocent. So you kind of wonder if he took advantage of her. And then he starts being a real jerk. I mean, he tells Isabel that he saved her, that he was the one who found her when she tried to commit suicide, and hence the scars on her wrist, and took her to the hospital. And maybe that's all true, but he's actually acting very much like Dawn at this point, like she owes him something. And that, you can tell that pisses Daryl off, and he says, "Nope, we're not doing it. We're leaving. Let's go. You're not going to be beholden to him so that I can get on a boat." And that's just Daryl being Daryl. He's just chivalrous, and, of course he would do that. But she gets upset with him. Now, I want to say, and let's just address this up front, there are going to be people who say that Daryl did that because he's in love with Isabel. I mean, there's going to be people who say it. But I actually think that they addressed this right before the scene with Quinn. It's subtle, but I picked up on it. There's a part where Quinn is talking to Isabel, and it's before he takes them into his office. And he kind of nods his head toward Daryl and says, "Is this your friend?" And she says, "We travel together." Now, he did only ask if Daryl was her friend, but there was a little bit of an implication there, like, is he a friend? Is he your boyfriend? Is he your husband? Are you together? You know what I mean? Especially as Quinn is her ex. I mean, there's definitely an edge of that meaning there. And all she says is, "We travel together." I mean, to me, that's them putting out there that there's nothing romantic there. That's what Isabel says. Daryl doesn't flinch. They're both in agreement about that. So I'm sure we'll see people on the internet saying how romantic it was that Daryl was defending her against Quinn. But that's just Daryl's natural chivalry. He's going to do that for anybody. He's going to feel protective of anyone who he sees as a friend, and he and Isabel are friends. So when they're in Quinn's office, I forgot about that. There's a couple of interesting references here. First of all, he offers her alcohol and she says no, that she's outgrown it. And I kind of wonder if that is true of Beth and Daryl as well. We always see the alcohol as a symbolism of them because they drank the moonshine together. And I think they'll reference that when they come back together. But it was kind of an interesting thing to say that they'd outgrown it. And I think that maybe that we were supposed to get that about Beth and Daryl because they did drink a lot of it and then they burnt the place down and we don't see them drinking again together. So it's almost like they needed that in the moment in order to work through their issues. But after that, they came out stronger and they didn't need it anymore. And we really haven't seen either of them drink since then. Anyway, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. And then there was a serious reference. When Isabel told Quinn that she'd become a nun, he said, "Are you serious?" And every time we see that, we see it as serious symbolism. So again, we're just on the path toward some sort of return. It also could be because Quinn returned himself. You know, he disappeared. I told you that because we didn't see him die, we were going to see him come back, and he did. So he's got a little bit of the serious symbolism around him as well. I did think that Isabel saying she didn't need a hero was thematically similar to Beth saying she could take care of herself. So then we see Cordon come into the nightclub, and maybe the pragmatism remark was actually a tiny foreshadow because obviously Quinn betrays them and tells Cordon where they are because we see him and his guys end up going into Falu's settlement and start smashing things, basically. But anyway, in the meantime, Isabel apologizes to Daryl, and it does come off as just a tiny bit desperate. Not that I don't think she was sincere. I think she was, but he's getting ready to leave, and she runs over and apologizes to him. And yeah, clearly she doesn't want him to leave. But Daryl did say, "I get it." And you know what? He said that in one of the previous 2 episodes, too. I don't remember which one it was, but I remember thinking that, writing it down. Like, they've used the "I get it" phrase, which is a Beth phrase, more than once. Then they talk about Laurent, and this is where the other Lucky reference comes in. He's getting after Isabel, telling her that she needs to tell Laurent the truth and to stop lying to him. And he says, maybe he's just a regular kid that got lucky and lived. And then he says, maybe that's your miracle. And I really liked that, that the miracle was that just the everyday person that lives. It doesn't have to be that Laurent is a messiah. But Laurent heard them talking. It's just one of those things you have to chuckle at, like parents don't think their kids can hear them, and he totally could, and got really upset. But right then, Cordon's men come in and start wreaking havoc, and everyone starts screaming, and stuff's getting knocked over. So Laurent leaves. He just kind of runs away and hides and shimmies down this little chute thing. And anyway, then they can't find him. And we have this great action fight between Daryl and Cordon. Most of it is just very action-packed. It's fun to watch. We get to see Daryl fight. One thing I did notice is that at one point he picks up a glass bottle and smashes it over Cordon's head, which is a callback to Beth doing that with the candy jar at Grady. So that was kind of fun to see. He almost chokes Cordon out. He came close to killing him, but then some of Cordon's men start shooting at him, and so he lets him go and runs away. And then we have this thing where he falls through the roof. It starts to crack and crumble beneath him. So it's kind of a callback to Rick and Michonne doing that in Say Yes. And we see him in the next episode. I don't think he's hurt, so I'm not sure exactly why they had him fall through the roof. I think it'll be clearer when we see the next scene, which will be in the next episode. But right after that, it pans up and we see the moon. We saw a full moon similar to this in Still, and we've seen it more than once at different times, but it's usually associated pretty heavily with Beth symbolism. So I think I'm going to cut it off there for today. That's not by far all the stuff that's in it. There's a lot of really small background details that we noticed, and I'll probably show some of those in edits and things like that. But as I said, this was more action and less, Beth sequences and Beth parallels, but still plenty of callbacks and things to talk about. And I always call these kinds of episodes, they're almost like a bridge episode. They're necessary to move the story forward. We have to find out what happens during this part, but at the same time, it's not like symbolism central or anything like that. It's not quite as exciting as last episode was, but still entertaining and very fun to watch. So yeah, let me know if you caught anything that I missed, and like I said, I will be posting videos all week where I answer the asks that were in my inbox. I got caught up on them, although I think I've already got some more today, but at least I'm making my way through them. But anyway, overall, I really liked the episode. It was really fun to watch. I'm going to watch it again, and I'm just excited to see what happens next. All right, talk to you later.